Welcome, everyone. You're joining us in Nighttime Logic, where I'm here with Jonathan Janz, and we'll talk a lot more about what we were just talking about, some of our favorite books by Mr. Stephen King. But first, let me introduce the show. This is Nighttime Logic. Nighttime Logic is the part of a story that is felt but is not consciously processed. And it is also the name of our series. It's June 13th, 2024. Here I'm coming from New York, where it's almost summer, which is the time for baseball, and it's a time where school's out, and it's the time where you and your friends have those endless summer in your secret tree houses, much as you do in a Jonathan Janz novel, who I'm here with. Jonathan Janz, how's it going, Jonathan?
It's going marvelously, and I didn't even know you were in New York. That's so cool, Daniel. That's awesome.
Oh, where I got it wrong the other day. Where are you broadcasting from?
From West Lafayette, Indiana. Yeah.
Okay.
So
We're in a bit of a different time zone.
Yeah. No, I think we're in the same one, weirdly enough. But I'm an hour north of Indianapolis and about an hour and a half south of Chicago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. One of my superpowers, in addition to the superpower of mispronunciation, is just getting facts wrong. I think I was like trying to schedule the time zone with you over scheduling things, but hey, we're here at the same place at the same time. Let me read your introduction, and then let's get to talking about your books. Jonathan Janz is the author of more than a dozen novels and numerous short stories. His work has been championed by authors like Joe R. Lansdale, Jack Ketchum, and Brian Keene. He has also been lauded by Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and the School Library Journal. His ghost story, The Siren and the Spectre, was selected as a Goodreads Choice nominee for Best Horror. Additionally, his novel, Children of the Dark, which we will be talking about at great length, was chosen by Booklist as a top 10 horror book of the year. Jonathan's main interests are his wonderful wife and his 3 amazing children. You can sign up for his newsletter, and you can follow him on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Amazon, Goodreads, all the places. And Children of the Dark 2, The Night Flyers, is recently released and is out now from Cemetery Dance Publications. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
It's great. It's great to have you here. Before I want to jump right into the questions, but before we begin, I just want to share with our listeners and our viewers a bit about my observations about Jonathan. So we met briefly for just the briefest of seconds last year at a convention called Scares for Cares, and my table was like across from his. It was diagonal, and one of the great things was I just loved. I hadn't met you and I hadn't read your books at that point, but what was great to see was just how excited people were to come to your table and to get a chance to meet you and to get a chance to pick up your books. And that is like, in a time when people don't read, in a time when there's just like a lot of negativity going on, it was just really great to see that. So, I just wanted to mention that to the viewers, if you're new to Jonathan Janz, about just the real wave of excitement about his work. So you were there, so you knew that, but hopefully it's great for you to hear that.
Thank you.
The second thing was you weren't at Scares for Cares this year, but I was volunteering. I was helping out over at the Cemetery Dance table, and where they only had one copy of this book approved, which is Children of the Dark 2, The Night Flyers. And man, if they could have sold that, they could have sold it over and over again. People were just coming there and they're like, I want that one. I want it. When is it? So, there's a lot of excitement. So
well, good.
You're a fly on the wall for that. But
awesome.
Speaking of exciting things, or things that excite us, in the beginning of Children of the Dark, which is the first book in this series, you mentioned something that you're excited about. One of the Netflix shows, Stranger Things, and what was cool about that is you talked about, while there are some similarities that are pretty overt and some really unique differences, what's cool is that they came out at the same time. So they weren't influencing each other, but they had this zeitgeist of certain things that were the same. That you and the Duffer Brothers perhaps had some of the same influences and enjoyments and excitement. So yeah, let's start. What is it? Tell us a little bit about what you like about Stranger Things, and maybe we can start with some of those similarities about what you might see in Children of the Dark and Night Flyers.
Sure, absolutely. I feel like there's a tendency when something gets popular. I've noticed this since I noticed it with music when I was younger, but like, people would know about a band before other people, and then so they were like all about it. But then the moment everybody else started to find out about it, all of a sudden, like, that band was labeled a sellout, and it wasn't cool anymore because it wasn't something that people could you know like be secretive about, or
They feel ownership or a connection or something.
they do. And I feel like I've almost, maybe I've imagined it, maybe it's real, but I feel like there's a little bit of that with Stranger Things, because I did not start watching it right away. Like, it had already become, I don't know, it came out July of 2016, and I don't think I started to watch it until maybe September of that year. But people were talking about it online quite a bit. And for
And
me,
Children of the Dark was already out, right? That was out either the same year or the year before, right?
March 2016. So it was about 4 months.
Okay.
4 months between the two. Children of the Dark came first, and then Stranger Things. And as you said, it's clear that neither one influenced the other. Like, it was, Stranger Things, I'm sure, was filmed and in the can and done well before Children of the Dark was released. So it's nothing like where they connected in that way, but it's just so striking how many similarities there are. I'll get into those in a second. I guess my other thing about the show is that, like, once I watched it, I just loved it. I loved it so much, and I continue to love it.
That's great. That's something they're comparing you to, is like, oh, thank God this is good, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I
Like-
find it endlessly entertaining. I'm rewatching it right now with my youngest, who's 13, and so we're on season 3 on our rewatch, and it's just so much
cool.
fun. We're getting ready for the Battle of Starcourt Mall episode, and that's so just climactic and cinematic. And
wow.
And I think that's one of the things I love about Stranger Things. I love all kinds of books. All right, I love subtlety. I love, like, for example, like the ghost stories of M.R. James. M.R. James wrote these just amazing ghost stories. The two most famous collections are Ghost Stories of an Antiquary and More Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. And mostly they're pretty subtle. And they're just like beautiful and amazing and scary and creepy, and every winter I reread them. So I definitely have an appetite for that kind of story, for subtle stories, for anything, as long as it's well done. But what I love about Stranger Things is it always has a payoff. And I feel like in that way the Duffer Brothers were really, I think, influence, and they've talked about this a little bit in interviews that I've to which I've listened. They were influenced by Steven Spielberg, who always went big at the end of movies, right? Like Jaws, that's a climax, right? That's not understated. That's like, we're going for it here. And they were influenced, I think, by like Aliens by James Cameron. And Aliens is a movie, you talk about upping the stakes, raising the stakes over and over. I think they're influenced by The Thing, and The Thing is a movie that just goes for it, right? Like, John Carpenter kept one upping himself as the movie went along. And I just really like big swings. I like movies and stories and TV shows that just, and it's fine to me. Like, I'm very forgiving of something if they swing and miss, because I respect that attempt. I feel like Stranger Things, they at least hit doubles.
Well, I think everything you mentioned there are, not only are they not misses, they might be the biggest hits, the biggest collection of the biggest and best, at least in my pantheon. Right up there on the top.
Yeah.
The top of the zeitgeist right there. But you said a lot of fascinating things I need to ask you about. First of all, you're talking about ghost stories. That's music. It's music to my ears. I'll have to restrain myself and not talking about ghost stories, but we'll have to maybe invite you back later on in the year when we have a little ghost story festival and ghost story conversation. Sounds like you're primed and already on that.
I'm in.
But hearing what you see in those influences, it makes so much sense in how I didn't. It's not that I didn't expect to hear you say that, but I was focusing on a different zeitgeist, more of the Spielbergian aspect of what I saw. What I know there's a lot of like specific similarities, like oh wow this and that, but I was looking at a general thing, like wow okay I could see how the Duffers, I could see how you are influenced by King or um, by Spielberg, and having that gang of kids and having that the protagonist. But it's totally apparent now that you mention it about stakes and tension. Because yeah, one of the things that I could see you're really all about in these books is about the tension, is about building it, pulling that spring back, and then on the other side of that, about having not only resolutions, but about having these big kind of creature, these kind of big creature feature climaxes and resolutions to that. So that you mentioned that you're mentioning, aliens and the thing and all those. It makes perfect sense that those those are your influences. And
And I
of
can't believe
course,
I didn't mention Stephen King. You mentioned that with a group of kids, and that's Stephen King is, as we talked a little bit before this. Stephen King is by far my biggest influence. Really, probably the two most influential entertainment figures are Stephen King, and for me, he's first, second, third, fourth, seventh, ninth, 10th, and then right after that, it'd be Steven Spielberg. But like you said, it's like both of them love that idea, that conceit of the group of kids battling some evil,
yeah, you
and
can
that
see the
obviously,
overlap. You can see the overlap of that, and no one has ownership to that. Although, like we closely, because they do it so well, and and King, and before them, Ray Bradbury, and yeah, there are so many people who do it in various successes. People like them to varying degrees, but so yeah, I sort of mentioned it. It's just sort of that zeitgeist, and maybe why you didn't see it at first is that it seems like it comes natural to you, that it's like there are certain things that are influences, and I think in choosing what you want to write about, maybe that is a natural thing to write about, and then doing something once we have that, and once you have your character, and the main character in Children of the Dark, his name is Will Burgess. Once you have that character, then I think the craft comes in, where you're talking about tension and ramping it up, and how all those movies and those stories ramp it up there. So you answered my question, like how does King influence you? What are some of your favorite like yeah, we were talking about this right as we went live. What are some of your favorite Stephen King stories, or King books? Right. How do you answer that? I just asked the impossible question, but
that is very
what's your favorite
difficult.
one at this moment?
Yeah, well, okay, so I'm wearing a Salem's Lot shirt, so I'd be remiss if I didn't
Okay.
mention that.
Yeah.
I'm reading You Like It Darker. I'm only two stories deep, but it's phenomenal. I'm
Yeah.
listening as I work out. I often listen to an audiobook as I work out, and I'm listening to The Wind Through the Keyhole right now. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, and I know you're a Dark Tower.
Okay, yeah. A Dark Tower supplemental. Maybe if it's anything that there could be a lesser known Stephen King, that might be on the lesser known spectrum there.
And I love it. I love Wind Through the Keyhole so much. I read it when it came out, loved it even more than the general population did. And
Hmm.
uh, then I was listening to the audiobook of Skeleton Crew not long ago, and
Oh, wow.
King narrated The Raft, which is a fun story. And
What? On the
yeah,
audiobook, he narrates The Raft. The
yeah.
Raft is my all-time #1 favorite Stephen King.
Wow, really? Okay, that's
Yeah,
cool.
so I gotta hear that. I gotta hear that. Wow,
You'll
thanks for letting
you'll
me know.
you'll love it, and it's so he does such a great job. But then, like, I didn't realize a lot of my King listening has been non-King because he's narrated a few, and I didn't really know
Hmm,
that. So he narrates Wind Through the Keyhole, and it's really special to
wow.
hear him. So I really feel like I'm reading that book for the for the second time for the first time, or for the first time for the second time, because it's a really different experience hearing King interpret his own work. Super cool.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. Yeah, it's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about. I think it was just like one or two more Stephen King questions, so we are going to talk about your work for
No,
sure.
we're great. I
But,
talk about King all
speaking,
night.
speaking, yes, but yeah, that's the problem. We're going to have to stop ourselves from talking about King all night. But um, on the subject of talking about King all night, you are going to you've got a busy year ahead of you. One of the events that you got is you're going to be a guest at what we were remarking was, I think, the first ever Stephen King con. We were like, can this be so? Is this really the first gathering or convention through dedicated to Stephen King? So tell us about King Con and how you're going to be a guest there.
Yeah, I heard about it from some people on Facebook. This one of my friends and readers named Jackie. She was talking about it, and she's somebody I met at AuthorCon, and she's a super cool person, and so I knew she was like legit. Yeah, because when you go get invited, there are all kinds of events everywhere, right? And you just don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
It's nice to know somebody who's involved with it, because
yeah, yeah,
then you know it's a good thing and a good event with people who have their heart
yeah.
in the right place. So I knew that she was great, and then I started to see people talk about King Khan a little more, and like we kind of. It's just amazing. I don't know. I guess it's the first event that's totally
Hmm.
devoted to King, which is so hard to believe. But it's in Las Vegas on October 24th, and I've never been to
Wow.
Vegas, so my wife and I are going to go, and there are going to be several writers there, several artists. I know just some of them are going to be like Ron Malfi, which I don't know which is going to be more dangerous, Vegas or Malfi, or Malfi in Vegas. It's kind of a scary situation. And then you're going to have Keelan Patrick Burke, Philip Fracassi. Those are just a few of the names I know of. And then
Wow.
Mick Garris, director, of course, of the Stand miniseries, and there'll be a lot of others and artists and other
Wow.
special guests. But it's just going to be great, and it's going to be a celebration of all things Stephen King. And I've loved that guy since I was 14.
Yeah.
So I
What an
was
honor. Well,
really,
it's an honor to be included.
yes, so
In
honored,
that,
so honored.
and what a joy just to celebrate, right? It sounds like, no, maybe we got to go to that. That just sounds like a blast, right? It's kind of like every convention sort of is a Stephen King con because
Yeah,
so many of us love Stephen King, and even on this show, it's just so hard to not mention Stephen King. It's almost like I have to ask, what are your influences besides King, besides, but um, yeah, and I think it's fascinating that you started off right away by talking about M.R. James, and M.R. James. Um, I want to ask you about a different trope, but I can't not mention that. Yeah, that you mentioned M.R. James as almost being on an opposite end of the spectrum, at least is the way I perceive King and Spielberg. You're like, yeah, that M.R. James is quiet, it's the subtle, and it may or may not offer you or the reader any resolutions. And that's the space where I work in as a writer, and I most often go there on this show. So it's great. It's great to talk to you about that. You're working, especially with these books, more in the King. I don't associate that M.R. James King. Everything is, the name of the show is Nighttime Logic, and we're talking about the subtle, talking about the implication, and King works in the daytime. His monsters are known entities. We're talking about Salem's Lot. There's no question that what we're facing. That we're facing the vampire, and there's no question what the stakes are. These the characters that he brings us. It sounds a lot as a brilliant novel for so many reasons. Like I believe it's I don't know how many hundred pages it is before we even get to the first hint that even something supernatural. Such a compelling tale about our character and his high school resolution until finally, I believe you're told that a dog dies when we first start to get that
In
thread
the
in.
graveyard, right?
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and you've presented another like a very Stephen King like character, a really likable character. He's an underdog. He's virtuous. He's an all American teen. He feels like somebody you could that fits right in a King book. He's good at baseball. He's close with his pals. He's protective of his little sister. And even in that Spielbergian King like trope, when we find him in Children of the Dark, he's mixing it up with bullies that can come right off the page of a Stephen King book. Um, so the trope that I started to think of is, when I think about, well, what makes horror tick? People love these books. I'm like, why are people not just loving them? Why are they connecting with them? And I was thinking, one of those tropes, it's maybe one of the oldest things that we relate to, is that horror is bad things happen to good people. And I feel like you've really like, you talk about hits, you've really hit that one square on. Like Will is such a likable, good guy, and man, you put him through the ringer. So how important is it? How important is it to you, like for both sides of that trope? How important is it to you in your writing to present a sympathetic lead? And yeah, we'll start with that before we put him through the ringer.
I think most of my leads are pretty sympathetic. Um, I think Chuck Wendig wrote an article about 25 things a great character needs, and there's one trait that I liked. He talked about livability, and it's because there are all kinds of great protagonists that you can use, and it doesn't have to always be super sympathetic, but it has to have that livability to where can you stand to be around this person for the next 200, 300 pages. And so I think that I've had protagonists that are less likable than Will, for sure. Some that might even be considered bad people. But hopefully they have that livability. I think with Will, I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think he is a very sympathetic character, partially because of just who he is. We talked about the King influence there. I think there's a lot of influence from both it and The Body on Children of the Dark.
Mm.
And so in The Body, which of course is also the movie Stand By Me, two characters, Gordy LaChance, the Will Wheaton character, and Chris Chambers, the River Phoenix character. Those two characters really they imprinted themselves on me when I was a kid, and that influence of that friendship really imprinted itself on me. And so, like with Will Burgess, the main character here, who's named after Will Wheaton, right, is a nod to that. And
Oh,
then,
okay.
and then Chris, his best friend Chris, who's named after Chris Chambers from Stand By Me and The Body. I think that they are like the kids in both The Body and Stand By Me. They're good people. They're good kids. They're not perfect, but they have great hearts. They try to do the right thing. I think one of the most, I don't want to give away The Body or Stand By Me, but there's a devastating moment at the end of the movie
I think
where,
it's fair. I think it's fair. Like I mean, they've been out long enough that we can.
yeah, well, something bad happens to the Chris Chambers character, and it happens to him because he's trying to intervene and do something good. He's try to do the right thing. And what's so, I think, devastating about that's what's so devastating. It's not that this kid went off and started to rob banks. It's not that this kid went off and became a whatever. He was really trying to stop this conflict because he's a good-hearted kid and good-hearted person. And I think Will is that kind of person in Children of the Dark. And I think you really see that in the relationship with his sister, with his friends, all that stuff. You talked about the bullies. Um, that's, so yeah, a lot of bad things happen to Will in that book, in both books.
And I mean, and then yeah, a lot of bad things happen to him in both books, but specifically, one of the bad things that happens to him is this great antagonist, one of the antagonists that you've created in Children of the Dark. Um, as if Will doesn't have enough to deal with. He's trying to protect his sister, or he's in, he's come from a household that's definitely suboptimal. He's trying to stick up for his friends. He's trying to get the girl. He's trying to also kind of put himself in between the bullies and all of the above, as if that wasn't livable enough and relatable enough. And they'll talk about ratcheting up the tension. Before he even comes on stage, there's a serial killer in play and on the loose in your story. And you talk about tension, and it's just like, I don't know, foreshadow isn't quite the word. I mean, it's just tension and ratcheting up the tension in the background when all these things are developing. You're like, yeah, don't worry. He's escaped from prison, but he's nowhere near here. And you're just like, oh no. Just give it a chapter or two. So yeah, we've got eventually, we'll do a little bit of spoiler territory for Children of the Dark, but we won't spoil anything for the Night Flyers because Children's been out for a while, but Night Flyers is the one that you're going to be reading now or just picking up. But tell us about the serial killer in Children of the Dark, and even more specifically, like why are we horror readers and writers, or maybe even more than us, pop culture in general? What's the appeal and the fascination of true crime and the serial killer as the villain?
Yeah, I think that like within a lot of things, I think really well drawn and acted villains in books and movies. I think that kind of adds to that mystique, at least for me. I think of somebody like Negan. I think it was that Jeffrey Dean Morgan, the actor in
Yeah,
Walking Dead.
The
You know,
Walking Dead.
I mean, he's horrible. At least he is, when he first appears. And so we really shouldn't want to watch him at all. But there's something about the taboo of following that character and what that
Yeah,
character does that's really like sort of, it's not like secretly appealing as though we want to do those things, but I think we're just fascinated by them because they're so alien to our experience. Another great example for me is Caroline Kepnes, her book series You. It's told from the point of view of a serial killer, Joe Goldberg. And like I just so many times as I read those books, I'm like, why am I rooting for him to not get caught? That's sick.
yeah.
That's twisted. That's terrible. But I think it's in the art. It's in Caroline's writing, and I just think that is part of the reason why. And then I think too, I think it's probably a King quote, but he talks about like we make up horrors to help us deal with the real ones. So in real life, the notion of a serial killer is just so sickening and horrifying. Like, how could somebody do that? How can somebody just take a life? Um, and I think that like dealing with them on the page and on the screen helps us, I guess, not feel better about them, but helps us work through those fears and that lack of understanding that we have. Because I do think we want to understand the world around us, and then maybe through art that can help us certainly not condone, but start to try to get into that headspace so at least it makes sense to us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't even have anything intelligent to add to that because yeah, I'm just totally perplexed in that I'm with you, like you just can't look away. I'm of all the things that scare me, it might be that yeah, that the serial killer scares me the most, or I won't read it or consume that, not because of any puritanical thinking, just because of like, wow, of all these things, yeah, that's the one. I'm from Long Island. our most recent serial killer, I probably rubbed elbows with on the train and the
Oh wow.
supermarket. No joke, I had written a short story, positing about. So it's like, wow, yeah, they talk about being afraid. Um, I forget which show it was. I think it was a Netflix show. Maybe it was the one. It was from Dahmer's point of view, perhaps, or one of the serial killers. And I had the same experience as you had. I'm like, this is totally fascinating. I'm sympathizing with them, and I think there's like some different kind of psychology in play. It's not that we're condoning it, or it's not that we're like wanting, or maybe some of us are. It's like, yay, death counter, yay, good people. That's perfectly fine too. But on the other side of that is like, yeah, it's just like, yeah, maybe there's some sort of psychology in that we're fascinated by people who are doing the taboo, or maybe people who are the best. Often like these shows unwind, they're almost like a reverse police procedural, and
Mm.
it's just like, wow, how did this guy get away with it? And we're just like endlessly fascinated by the animal cleverness of it. But and then you say the king quote of, and then and I mentioned that, yeah, okay, it's the thing that's the most real. But here's where I was reading your book, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm like, all right, yeah, I'm always looking at it for tropes. I'm always looking at it for big picture. And I'm like, who is this Jonathan Janz? Why are people loving this book? Okay, he's got a serial killer. And I thought I knew what was going on. And you were just like, hold my beer. And what's the serial killer's name again?
Carl
Uh,
Paget.
Carl Paget. Not only is he a serial killer, and I guess this is some of the spoiler warning for children, he's not serial killers. They're of this earth. They're a real world. They're real men, real women, real people. But you add the supernatural on top of that to this serial killer. Paget, in addition to him being a serial killer, he has been, before he had been locked up, he had crossed paths with the supernatural bad guys, bad things, bad days for Will here. Um, long before he had mixed it up with Will, and I was just like, wow, okay, I didn't see that coming. So not only are you dealing with a serial killer, you're now two of these lines of tension that you were giving us that you didn't want. You're like, Will, just protect your sister, just get the girl, just do your thing. But no, you've got to deal with these things, the children in the dark, which we'll talk about in a bit. And now you also have to deal with Paget. And to make things worse, Paget uh, he's empowered by the supernatural as well. Um, so towards that supernatural element, you introduce it as in introducing it side by side with some Native American lore. And when I think of Native American lore, when I think of Stephen King, I think of Pet Sematary, which is a place that has the power. Pet Sematary is such a great book, and there's so many things going on. But in terms of the supernatural, it's really focused on this place that isn't necessarily a Native American burial ground. If I'm remembering it correctly, it is this place that is maybe adjacent to a Native American burial ground. It was something that was there before the Native Americans were there. What's the appeal of using that sort of folklore, that sort of Native American lore, and what are some of the appeals and some of the drawbacks of using it in the horror genre?
Yeah, I think that when you start to tread into like that particular area, really any culture, not necessarily your own, I think that it's important to be mindful of how you're doing that, and that you're doing it in a respectful way and coming at it from a place of good faith. The thing is that I also feel like it's in a strange way. I feel like it's dishonoring like Native American like mythology and folklore to pretend it doesn't exist. And because it absolutely does. It's fascinating. It's like in growing up where I did in this small town in Indiana. We would study it in a little bit, and certainly I was fascinated by it. There were books in my school library about it, and I remember looking through them and finding them fascinating. And so I think on one hand, it's one thing to read it, to kind of like, in a way, let it, for me, it influenced me like the other things that we're talking about, because I read a lot of stories when I was younger about, that were myths and part of that folklore. And it influenced me. At the same time, I think, and I forget exactly how Pet Cemetery goes. I remember the Micmac burial ground. I remember that. And it might have been, and I kind of, if indeed, if it's from like before that, because I think it does that too, right? It talks about this kind of astral, from another planet, this intergalactic aspect. And then that ends up, like, I think, connecting to, or at least the Native Americans in that story with the ritual of chud. There's like an intersection there between, right? And so I feel like the way King handled that was interesting. And I feel like with Children of the Dark, it's a similar kind of idea that, I'm that they acknowledge in the story. Barley, is he's researching. Barley is Will's other good friend. He researches, he's reading, and he comes across this Native American idea of the Wendigo. And I think he's studying Iroquois myth at the time. But anyway, but then they begin to kind of wonder whether or not this is something that predates,
Yeah,
even the
I
Native
thought
Americans in the area.
I noticed the positive similarities. I think it's really well. I think you put it really well. You said a lot of well put things there. Um, in that, first off, both you and King do handle it. Yeah, I think you're handling it well in not doing the classic cowboys versus Indians dichotomies. Sometimes it's like, we're good, they're bad, we're this, they're that, they're evil. It's not even close to doing that, because it's not even certain what's going on. Like you said in King, it's like, yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, they're even the Native Americans were talking about this sort of cosmic thing. And in Children, yeah, you do mention the Wendigo, and like there is some research, or I even think there might be one character who says, yeah, one of the theories is that the children, these creatures that live around, are actually children of the Wendigo. And that's like really all, and that's not presented with any judgment. It's not presented not even necessarily as the truth. It's just, it's really scary because the Wendigo is really scary. Like if you're a kid and you read the Wendigo,
Right.
like you're like, man, that's, at least as a kid, I didn't go into great depth, but like when I heard about that stuff, like there was something, even a really basic level, there's something really chilling about that. And yeah, I think it adds just a level of verisimilitude and a level of fear that it's possible that the monsters that in this book might have a connection to that, either in lore or in actuality. So yeah, tell us about Will's other headache and a half times 10. What are these things? These the children of the dark, the monsters in this creature feature here.
Yeah, I think that when you start to get into like ancient evil, I think that's a really rich, fascinating area. We talked about it. Obviously, Lovecraft probably wasn't a good dude, but his older elder god mythos is, a pretty big part of horrors, whatever, are like the heritage of horror. And for me, like the children who are the the creatures to whom you're alluding, they are, I think, a very, very ancient species of creature that, you would talk about another influence. They're different than the beings in The Descent, the Neil Marshall movie. But I think that
Mhm.
movie probably influenced me a little bit too, because that subterranean kind of pale, featured like look that they have. And then of course the children in this story, my creatures are 9, 10, 11 feet tall, extremely
Yeah.
thin but extremely powerful, with sharp teeth, sharp claws, lambent glowing green eyes. And I'm pretty proud of them. I also kind of imagine, what else I think influenced them was kind of Gollum. I love Lord of the Rings,
Oh,
and
okay.
obviously
I'm
they're
a big
much.
Lord of the Rings fan.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
Lord
they're
of
your worst nightmare. Like, you do describe a lot of maybe the body language of them like feels a lot like Gollum in
Right,
that way.
exactly. And so I think that they're like these nightmarish, gigantic, murderous golems in a way. But in fact, when I was the first publisher, I remember when we were talking about cover art, might even because it's like there have been two iterations now of Children of the Dark, two different publishers, and two different iterations of Savage Species, which is connected to Children of the Dark. But anyway, I think when you get these sheets about cover art and they ask you to give them like inspiration pieces, I think in both cases I sent pictures of the most diabolical looking golems from like the Two Towers and Return of the King that I could, just Andy Serkis in his most vicious, evil mode. And that's kind of how I picture their faces, which is fun. Fun for a horror writer, maybe not fun for the reader, but fun for me.
Um, Before we shift our conversation over to the Night Flyers, one more question about Children of the Dark, and then maybe you'll read a bit from the Night Flyers before we start talking about it. In the end of Children of the Dark, um, Will's in an even worse place than when it began.
Yeah.
He's more of an underdog. He's had even more loss. He's more of an outsider, and I believe we see him. He's in the asylum at the very end
Yeah.
of Children of the Dark. How does all of that lead into the Night Flyers?
Yeah. So Will obviously survives the first book, but a lot of people don't. And I think it's a pretty, like, if you were to take things on a 1 to 10 scale, where 10 is the bleakest, most horrible ending you can imagine, and one being or one or 10 being the happiest, one being the bleakest. I would say that Children of the Dark ends at about a three, 3.5. Like it ends like there's more sadness and tragedy than happiness. Maybe a three is being generous. So it ends in a pretty unhappy place. Like you said, we find him in an asylum at the end of the book. The very last chapter of Children of the Dark, he's in an asylum. And so the second book, Children of the Dark 2, which is right here, it begins. There it is. Oh, there you go. You got it. It begins. Oh, it looks so nice on the screen. It begins like the next day, I think, right after the first book ends. So we jump right into it. And it's interesting because, like, even so, Children of the Dark, the main plot takes place over just a few days. And then we skip ahead basically a year to that little, that epilogue. But then Children of the Dark 2 also takes place in a very compressed time period, just about 3 days, but it takes place right after that epilogue from book one. Yeah.
All right, cool. So, can we turn it? Will you read? We turn it over to you. Read
Yep.
a bit from the Night Flyers, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you. All right. So I thought I'd do something a little different here. I'm wearing my glasses. They're crooked. What is happening? There we go. I I haven't worn my glasses since school ended, so this is kind of weird for me. I also, by the way, so usually when I usually read like the first chapter of a book, or I'll read like a super, I don't know, this is the first time I've kind of dropped viewers or listeners into the middle of an action scene. So what's happening right now? So this is heavily influenced by Aliens. This novel is Shown in the Dark too. So what's happening right now is Will and this agent of some sort, this government guy named Barker. They are so the whole asylum, the whole institution is under siege from these other creatures called the Night Flyers. And you see them at the very end of Children of the Dark. My glasses are so crooked. Are they always that crooked? When I'm in front of my student, this is so crazy. Anyway, sorry. I'm just fascinated by that, or if my computer or my head or whatever. All right. So the point is that in the end of the first book, we glimpse this creature, which is like this uh, uh, dragon-like figure. That it's long, it's ferocious, it's got claws, talons, and rips people apart. So it's like the the sky equivalent of the children. All right, so the whole institution has been attacked. Many people have died, and now we have Will and Barker, this guy, trying to save both of them, kind of like creeping through the institution. So here we go. Get a drink of water. Adjust my glasses one more time. They're terribly crooked. I'm self-conscious. Here we go. Chapter 6, Warriors. My first impression of the main hallway was cluttered. In the murky greenish light that flickered from the dying fluorescence, I could just make out vague humps scattered everywhere, objects of various sizes and shapes strewn about as though there'd been an explosion. Barker started left, but he'd only taken a few steps when he froze. I opened my mouth to speak, but he brought a forefinger to his lips. I surveyed the clutter around us, and even had the lights not flicked on at that moment, I would have been rendered speechless by the revelation of what I was seeing. The hallway was a slaughterhouse. Emilio, I discovered, hadn't made it far. His body lay face up, his eyes gaping, his chest opened like a tropical flower, and his entrails strewn around in a gruesome red snow angel. Just a kid, a voice within me lamented. True, Emilio had treated me like crap, but that didn't mean he deserved to die. But I'd learned a long time ago that death had nothing to do with deserving or not deserving. When death was ready for you, it came for you with both barrels blazing, or in this case, with razor-sharp talons and scythe-like teeth. Focus, I told myself. But I couldn't. The abattoir staring at me deprived me of rational thought. Bodies lay like garbage bags someone had heaved from the bed of a moving truck, their contents having scattered when they hit the interstate at 70 miles per hour. I knew I'd be able to identify most of these people if I allowed my eyes to linger on their mutilated corpses, but I didn't want that, didn't want to humanize these misshapen spills of blood and body parts. Because I could scarcely move as it was, could scarcely breathe. I wondered idly if a person's involuntary functions could cease from fright. Behind us, there were more eviscerated carcasses and 3 doors standing ajar, one of them torn free of its hinges and resting atop a victim. This way, Barker whispered, clasping my hand. The lights flickered, then winked out entirely before returning to that sickly greenish glow. We stepped down the blood-slicked corridor, taking care not to make a sound. Overhead, the lights continued their erratic cycle. As we crept past the corpses, mostly teenagers with a few adults mixed in, the sight of Barker's cautious face recalled another responsible adult I'd met last summer. Officer David Wood of the Indiana State Police had risked his life to help me escape one of the children, only to be murdered by Carl Paget. Had Officer Wood simply saved his own hide, he might have survived that ghastly rain-swept day. But he hadn't, and his kids were fatherless because of his unselfishness. I disengaged my hand from Officer Barker's. He glanced back at me, a hint of puzzlement in his eyes. I worried momentarily I'd have to say something by way of explanation, but he spared me by continuing through the hallway. What could I have said anyway? I'm grateful, but people who help me have a way of dying gory deaths. Ah, hell, Barker murmured. He continued around a hump shape, which I now identified as Officer Good. My gorge clenched. Good's neck had been degloved was the word that popped into my head, but I knew that wasn't correct, because this wasn't one of Good's hands that had lost its skin, it was his neck. One of the creatures had somehow managed to yank the skin upward from the tops of Good's shoulders to the base of his chin, and I couldn't look any longer. I realized we were about to pass my own cell. I glanced at the door and remembered how many nights I'd spent there thinking of Peach, Mia, and Barley. Most of all, Peach. If this were a movie, I'd insist on Barker letting me stop at my room. My most precious possession was inside, tucked under my mattress. The letter from Peach that Pierre had smuggled in. There was a part of me that wanted badly to retrieve it. But this wasn't a movie, and after all, it was only a damned letter. I wanted the real thing. I wanted my sister back. I passed my room for the last time and gripped the cleaver tighter. The handle was solid, if a bit slippery from my sweat. It was a reminder that we weren't powerless, that we might still escape this nightmare. We continued on. I heard a squelching sound. Baker went rigid and glanced down at his foot, which was surrounded by a lake of blood. Whose blood it was didn't matter. I distinguished the vague shape of an inmate's light blue uniform, but mercifully the lights wavered at that point, and I was able to look away before identifying the victim. Barker lifted his dripping sneaker and proceeded down the hallway. I realized we were moving toward the cafeteria. Officer Barker, I think we should... There's a service elevator this way, he whispered. They use it for food delivery. There are stairs right next to it. Now shut up before they hear us. I shut up. But almost as if I'd witnessed it firsthand, I imagined how it had unfolded. Good leading the inmates out of the cafeteria, the whole herd of them fleeing down the corridor, discovering more beasts in the hallway and fleeing back the way they'd come, being ridden down one by one and reduced to red mush. We were only 40 feet from the service elevator. To my right, a cell door hung half off its hinges. The wire mesh outer window of the cell had been pulverized. I remembered the other doors that had been ajar, and a thought so monstrous took root in me that the words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. It was coordinated. Barker looked at me. But I was going on, the revelation crystallizing as I spoke. The first creature, I said. It burst through the cafeteria window to scare us, to flush us out. The others, I made a quick mental count, 4 others, at least, smashed through the inmates' windows and attacked these people in the hallway. Barker's eyebrows gathered inward. Inmates? Me. Them, I explained, flourishing a hand at the corpses. Barker was shaking his head. How does this help? I swallowed. It doesn't. It just means... Barker leaned forward, eyes widening sarcastically. I sighed. It means they're smarter than I thought. Barker grunted. Terrific. Can we get moving again? I nodded, sure my cheeks had gone the color of overripe tomatoes. The wall to the service elevator corridor felt like hours. Or the walk there felt like hours. We finally reached the door. When Barker raised his swipe card, I had a momentary worry the card readers would no longer work with the facility's compromised electrical system. But the red light gave way to green, and then we were creeping down the short hallway toward another steel door. The short corridor was even murkier than the main hallway had been, but to our left I made out the gleaming steel doors of the service elevator. Perhaps sensing the direction of my gaze, Barker shook his head. Can't risk it. They corner us in the elevator. Or if it gets stuck, it'll become our tomb. Wide-eyed, I glanced at the shiny steel doors. Barker had a point. We reached a dreary gray door at the end of the corridor. Barker brought his face close to the square window, peered into the gloom of the stairwell, and his shoulders drooped. "What?" I demanded. "See for yourself," he said, moving to accommodate me. I peered into the semi-darkness of the stairwell, and what I saw almost made my bladder unleash. The younger lunch lady had fled this way. She hadn't made it. A night flyer was roosting on the backs of her legs, its maw buried in the middle of her back. In the moment before I looked away, gagging, I noticed how its wings quivered as it gorged itself. Barker sighed. "Guess we go back to the..." His words died. His eyes widened. Together, we faced the door we'd passed through moments earlier, from which footsteps echoed. But the sound of them, they weren't human footsteps. All right, there we go. And I'll take these crooked things off my head.
It must be fantastic reading. Well done. And
Thank you.
don't be self-conscious about the glasses. That's my third writer superpower. I have the power of mispronunciation, the power of making things up, and the power of my glasses are always on crooked, especially on camera. So,
I never seen myself read with them. That was so bizarre. Anyway,
now you're gonna have to ask your students if it's been that way all the time. But,
I will, and we'll see if they're honest.
It's a good look. It's a crazed. It's the crazed professor look. Before in the remaining, that was a great reading. We'll use the remaining time for a couple of questions about the night flyers. But before we do that, this is the time in the show. I'm just going to read a couple of shout outs to friends of the show.
Sure.
The first one is The Horror from the High Desert podcast. That's hosted by friend of the show, Scotty Mildner. His episode is airing tomorrow, Friday. It's featuring Eric Sundquist, who's a horror author and the owner and publisher of Dark Peninsula Press. That's in the Horror and the High Desert from the High Desert podcast tomorrow. Another podcast is Jason's Weird Reads, and host Jason White is doing a Dark Tower read along, I believe, this summer. So go over to Jason's Weird Reads on YouTube, and they're talking about the Dark Tower. So I'm going to check that out. And next month here on Nighttime Logic, my guest will be Nicholas Velardes, and this is an advanced copy of his new book, The Deading. So we're going to be talking about that new book right here next month. The Night Flyers is it barely a month out? How long? It's just came out. Just a few weeks ago. That was a great aliens influence little passage you gave us.
Yes.
And it's in the asylum there. What is it about asylums and those sort of settings that lend themselves to the horror genre?
Well, I think, in a perfect world, we would always have good, we'd always go to the hospital and get healed. Or we'd go to facilities like, the psychiatric facility in this book, and they would get better and everything would go as planned. But I think, we all know that that's not always people's mileage. And I think that for often good reason, we get nervous when we go to the hospital, either because of ourselves or because of the people we love. So I think that that's one level of nervousness.
There's something inherent about the place, so we're already at unease.
Yeah, exactly. Most of us have, if you live long enough, you're going to have a bad experience in a hospital at some point, right? And that's no fault of the staff there. It's just the nature of human existence. I think another facet is that it's a very self-contained environment. It is it does seem like its own little universe. I think the more isolated something is, the more suspenseful it can become. And I feel like in a hospital, even though, yeah, you usually don't have big, vast spaces. I know that some modern hospitals have like those like 3-story atriums or whatever, but I think most hospitals are pretty like segmented, pretty isolated from other, because of medical reasons, probably. They try to, keep them separated from other wings. So I think it's an isolated place. You like something, I was watching Stranger Things a couple nights ago, and there's a great scene. Well, first of all, the quintessential example of what we're talking about is the penultimate episode of season 2 with Bob the Brain in a very like alien-esque situation, and that's a lot like the scene I just read.
Yeah,
But also in season 3, there are some great scenes in a hospital where Nancy and Jonathan are going to see this woman named Doris Driscoll, this older woman who's become flayed by the mind flayer, and they get attacked by these two flayed, kind of zombie-like whatever individuals, and people at the other characters in the hospital in the lobby have no idea, and you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, they might as well be on another planet, because nobody is going to help them. Nobody knows what's happening to them right now. So I think that it's both isolated and then tinged with that undercurrent of bad memories. So
yeah. As you were saying that, I was trying to think of an answer to the question myself, and it came and along the lines of what you were saying. Often, what's presented, it's a place where there's a violation of trust. Where you said, oh, when you said, oh, it's supposed to be this place of healing, but chances are there's been bad experiences there, or at least bad experiences, in our fiction. And a lot of those bad experiences, like you said, in Stranger Things, in our fiction, maybe unfortunately in some of our lives, it's where the people who are meant to heal us, who have entrusted us, and it's been an abuse of power or an abuse of we don't want to go into too many spoilers. Yeah, but Will's doctors, not all of them are on his side necessarily in this book here. Um, the creatures themselves, the night flyers, so to speak, without going into spoiler turf, what can you tell us about their connection to the Children of the Dark, and what about their connection, if any, to Will? Or what can you just tell us without spoiling about these creatures that you want a reader to know going into the book?
yeah, I think so. That's something I want to explore a lot. I want this to be I'm thinking a quadrilogy. So I feel like we're kind of halfway through the series right now, and I want to explore that a lot in the third and fourth book. What I can say right now is that it's explored a little bit in Savage Species, a novel that's kind of connected to these. I think that the two, so both of these species, the night flyers and the children, are really ferocious. They're kind of like dominant apex type predators, and so they are rivals. They're enemies because of that, because they kind of occupy the same place, and they have different strengths. Like the children kind of rule the ground, and then the night flyers kind of rule the air. But then, of course, they intersect sometimes. And for me at least, I imagine both of them being there long before humans, or at least having some connection to really, really early humans. So I think that they're both ancient species. And at the end of the second book, there's also like another breadcrumb in the mythos, because we meet like this kind of third element that ties to the children. So I guess I kind of hemmed and hawed and danced around your question, but
Well,
maybe that
you got to read. No, I think this is the right time for hemming and hawing because the book's out. You got to read the book to find out what he's talking about and to get that breadcrumb of what we may see a little bit more of there.
yeah,
But horror, one of the things that in our favorite horror films, our favorite creature features are going to what you mentioned about the asylum as the closed-in setting. Um, it's a thing that we see time and time again, probably because there's something about it, about having our gang, our Scooby gang, our gang of friends, or just a random gang of survivors. They're holed up in an enclosed space or a finite space, and they're outnumbered, and they're facing down a creature or groups of creatures, aliens, Dawn of the Dead, whether it's the spaceship, the shopping mall. Yeah, Dawn of the Dead really kind of comes to mind.
Yeah.
Um, what is it about, bringing it back full circle, about ramping up the tension, and how Spielberg and how King and how these books, they do deliver on that climax. They deliver, pardon me, on that showdown, the stand, the last stand. What is it about that heroes versus creatures last stand that make it a staple of the genre, and how does that all come into play in the Night Flyers and in your work?
Yeah, there are a few guiding principles, and they're not unique to me, but they're principles that I kind of have latched onto or believe in, and one of those is to let your heroes be heroic. I think it's really important to put your characters in sink or swim situations, because that's where the true suspense lies. Just as you were talking about different scenarios, one that I was remembering was how they end up underground. And there aren't going to be adults. The cavalry's not coming. Like, nobody's coming to save you. You're either going to die or you're going to face. You're going to stand these. Well, that's why The Stand might be one of the greatest titles. For all the other things about it I love, but
Mm.
that's kind of the essence. It's like, do you make a stand against evil? Like, do you have that courage? Because I think
And you make a choice? Do you make a choice? A lot of times, these do or die situations, they come down to a choice, and they come down to also, yeah, that choice is embodied in a physical conflict or a stand.
right. I'm fascinated by that, and I think that we love stories because we love characters. And I think that you really get to the marrow, the soul of your character, when you put them through terrible things. You were talking about all the stuff that Will goes through. I feel like that helps us know him on a deeper and deeper level, and relate to him on a deeper and deeper level. And then I think that when we I love how Chief Brody, like in most of my favorite movies, I love how Chief Brody has to stare down the shark. I love how Luke Skywalker has one chance with Darth Vader, breathing down his neck, closing in on him. I love how Andy Dufresne has to stare down like hopelessness in Shawshank Redemption, right? That's a very different kind of villain, but that's like the overarching evil force, is
But
that
structurally, they're all the same. Structurally, they're the climaxes. Mythologically speaking, they're in the belly of the whale. They're in
right.
the belly of the beast. Structurally speaking, this is the moment where it's do or die, quite literally.
Yeah.
And our heroes, and the stories are going to be forever changed if they survive it.
Yeah, and I love that drama. I love that suspense. I love when writers play fair. Like an example, a great there's a movie. A lot of my favorite movies, if I made a top 25, would be like animated movies. One that I love is How to Train Your Dragon, the
Okay,
original.
yeah.
One thing I love about that so much is that if you've seen that, there is a toll that's taken at the end on the character. He doesn't get out unscathed. And I love the movie up until that point. But when that happened, that just elevated it to a new level for me, because that rang true. Because we rarely do get out unscathed when we go through something traumatic. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm for happy endings if they're earned. But even in a happy ending, I think there has to be some acknowledgement of what we've been through and how that's going to affect us later on, and affect.
There's a price that's paid that makes it feel earned.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I
And
agree with.
isn't there nothing uh, nothing worse. Or one of the things that feel hollow in a story or a movie where you're like, oh, that was too easy.
Yeah,
Right? You can take a great movie and you're like, oh, that was too easy. And I think you're um, explaining or unpacking what we're really saying when we feel that was too easy. But yeah, like
that's right.
they didn't earn it. They didn't perhaps pay the price for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I was watching I saw Furiosa the other night. And I love Mad Max
Loved
Fury.
it.
Yeah, Mad
Yeah,
Max Fury Road is one of my top 10 movies of all time. But
same.
Furiosa, yeah, it's amazing. Best action movie ever made in my opinion, but Furiosa was phenomenal. But what was so cool was how they first of all the stuff they put her through, and then we get to see how she becomes what she becomes, and she's clearly affected by it, like not just physically but emotionally. She has all these scars, and then she and Hemsworth, Chris Hemsworth really is the villain. Like I people kept saying that, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm sure he's likable, but oh my, he's the villain. Like he's a pretty
He's a
reprehensible.
villain you love. He's a real unique villain in that you're loving the performance, but you do love to hate him.
Yeah, he becomes more
It's
and
the
more
right.
reprehensible as the story goes along. He becomes worse and
Yeah,
worse. It's a
yeah.
great performance, but I just love how those two are forced to confront one another. I just think that was brilliant the way that George
It's really
Miller.
a story of antagonists. Furiosa really is a triangle, if then some, of antagonists, and it really is masterful how you have it's such a great surface level popcorn fun, and yet at the same time in both movies, Fury Road in particular, I think it's some of the most important and most well done storytelling of our age. I put I think Fury Road tells a really important story there.
Agreed.
In addition to just being good smash 'em up, amazing visuals. The visuals just go you know on and on and on over decades of these films, of how the technology and cinematography has evolved. It's just been a joy.
Yeah,
But
I agree. I think one thing that really separates Fury Road, and this, coming back to, the books we're talking about here, I think that you can't simply have a story where this happens and then this happens and then this happens. There has to be this connective tissue, and I think this is a word that people I think probably get annoyed by, probably because of English teachers might like me. But
uh,
I think the word theme, really comes
oh
up
yeah,
as
oh,
I
it's
think
the most
about.
the theme and the story and the character. George Miller, he was the guy that everyone counted out, but he masterfully and uniquely he sewed them all together in a way where Fury Road or films like it are often imitated but never duplicated. Whatever that thing is that yeah, there are you can most thing that Hollywood gets wrong is they copy Spielberg, they copy Fury Road, they copy all these things, but it's missing the theme. It's missing that bit of craft. Is why there are so many near misses or so many just misses. Why there are classics, and then there are stories that fall short of them.
Yeah,
And I think it's I'm with you in that it's with the hero. It's where hero one it has to do with letting, as you said, really well, letting your hero be a hero, um, paying the price, perhaps. Yeah, there's so many ways to pull off to pull it off there. And Fury Road does it well. Yeah, and in that structure, yeah, just like Will Will is in that belly of the beast. He's in that place where he has to make a choice. It's a place where he's going to be forever changed. And yeah, I forgot the name of the war boy in Fury Road, but we sort of see the stories. All stories are not the same, but you sort of see where structural in the movies I think that mean something to us. You can see structurally where these things, the magic is happening.
yeah.
And
Nux, I think, is the war boy you're talking about. That
yeah,
that character, that's such an important, fascinating journey because it shows that we're capable of change. because he was such a
He's the
zealot.
dynamic character of the story. He is the dynamic character
He was such a
of the
zealot.
story where Max and Furiosa, in a way, even though it's their story, they're almost the Watson character, the character who actually goes through what we're talking about, who goes through that full arc and comes out changed, is not Furiosa or Max, but it is Nux in that way, and that's just one of the amazing things about the stories.
I love
And
how
it sounds like Will Burgess is only in the halfway point of his story. You've answered my final question, which is Night Flyers the end of the story? So I think we've got a definitive no on that. Is there more? Anything you can tell us about more Will Burgess and his friends and monstrous foes?
yeah,
Or we
yeah,
just
yeah.
have to stay tuned?
Well, a couple things. It's funny because the book I'm writing right now, the book I'm editing, is the shortest one I've ever, one of the shortest novels I've ever written. It's going to end up about 65,000 words. But Children of the Dark 3 is going to be probably on the longer side because unlike Children of the Dark 1 and 2 that are very compressed timelines, Children of the Dark 3 I think is going to take place more over a school year. And I think it's
Mm.
going to be it's definitely going to be visceral, it's definitely going to have action, but I think it's going to have a lot of mystery in it as well. And I think that by letting the story breathe a little bit like that, I think we're going to be able to like the relationships, we're going to see them change and grow and see the characters change and grow. I mean, I think there's character growth and change in the first two books, of course, but I think we're going to see that in a more not real time way, but certainly in a more expanded way, which I'm really excited about. We're going to get to see Will. I don't want to give too much away, but there's going to be a school element to the story, which I'm really excited by. I've never, now that I think about it, I don't know that I've written a story. Actually, there's one called Halloween Gods that my agent and I are working on that has a school element. But other than that, this is going to be the only other that has, like, because I've taught for a long time now, and that's a world
Yeah,
I know that world really well, right? So I'm going to be able to use that and to help create this
and we
novel.
get to see these characters in a different situation and
Yes,
over in a different factor. That's something that the novel is meant to do. We're going to see these characters over a period of time. So it sounds
right.
like we're going to be getting everything we like, but some different. Going to get to see these characters in different situations.
Yes.
Well, thanks you for giving us that sneak peek on that, and thank you so much for your conversation and your time about Children of the Dark and Children of the Dark 2, the Night Flyers, both from Cemetery Dance Publications. Where can readers connect with you to find out more about your many other books and what's going on?
Yeah. Well, before I forget, Daniel, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for doing such a wonderful job, for having me on your show. You've just been amazing and kind and brilliant. So thank you. So
Thank
I
you so
really
much.
appreciate it. As far as where people can find me, pretty much anywhere. Like, so I'm on Twitter pretty frequently, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, occasionally TikTok, Goodreads, Amazon is where they can find my books. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores, wherever, libraries, wherever they want to get them. As long as they read them, I'm happy. A lot of them are on audiobook. Both these books are on audiobook. Matt Godfrey narrated both, and I think he's just done an exquisite job. He did something special for Children of the Dark 2. The first two chapters are like this transcript between these doctors and Will. And so Matt did a, like, almost like a theatrical with sound effect interpretation of it that was
Oh,
so
wow.
awesome. So I hope people read that audiobook because Matt just knocked it out of the park. So yeah, I've got that stuff going on. Marla, we're getting closer. Marla is a novel I wrote that came out in limited edition. It's getting closer to finding the right home for a mass market edition. So Marla,
Wow.
I'm hoping toward the end of this year or early, or maybe next year, 2025, we'll get to see a mass market version of Marla. There is a novel called Veil coming in September of 2025 through Blackstone, which I'm super excited about. One of the best things I've written. It's a sci-fi horror novel. I'm so excited about it. I have,
Congratulations.
thank you. I have a story in the Stephen King anthology, The Stand.
Oh, right.
The story is called Lenora. I've never worked so hard on a short story. I'm super proud of it.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
thank
For the
you.
readers who may not know, there is a tribute to The Stand that's coming out. Is that edited by Brian Keene and others, if I'm not mistaken?
Brian Keene and Christopher Golden have just done
And they've selected their some of their favorite writers to write stories in the Stephen King The Stand universe, and that's all that's known right now. But it's one of the most anticipated projects, and you're going to be a part of it. So that's super exciting. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. That'll come out in 2025 in June from Simon and Schuster. I think Gallery is the imprint. And yeah, like you said, it's just like it's a shocking table of contents. I can't even begin to I don't want to leave anybody out, but like Josh Mallerman, I got to read his story. It's just a knockout. Caroline Kepnes wrote a story for it. There's so many amazing writers who are going to be in it. Yeah, so that's exciting. The book I'm editing right now, love it as much as anything I've written. So excited about that. I'm going to probably finish editing that in early July and then start on another new novel. That one, I'll begin work on that in July. I have another novel finished called The Stars Have Left the Skies. I have to edit that and get it to my agent. So a lot happening. Oh, and
So you've got,
yeah.
hey, this is good. You've got a lot on your plate, and that means fans of Jonathan Janz, you're going to have it in your hands coming down the pipe. So this is good to hear.
Yeah. And I don't want to be remiss. There's another story in this Fear of Clowns anthology called The Drolls is the name of the short story in that. And that's coming out, I think, in October. And that's got an amazing table of contents, this Fear of Clowns anthology. So anyway, I'll see. Sorry to interrupt. I would have felt guilty if
this is the point where I want people to connect with your work. And it sounds like a lot of exciting projects. So
thank you.
We'll have to have you back to maybe talk about some or all of them, or have you back later in the year to talk about ghosts with us. So
I would love to.
Signing off, thank you again to Jonathan Janz. Thank you to all of you who are tuning in to listen, and enjoy the summer, and enjoy the Night Flyers too. The Night Flyers, Children of the Dark too, from Jonathan Janz. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Daniel.